This next segment is brought to you by Blue Cross and Blue Shield's National Labor Office. You know, Blue Cross and Blue Shield companies formed out of a need to provide affordable health care to teachers, to loggers, and miners. That was back in 1965, 60 years ago. That's when the Blues developed the National Labor Office to strengthen its commitment to organized labor. Well, today, Blue Cross and Blue Shield's National Labor Office remains focused on America's workers, advocating for affordable and equitable health care, partnering with strategic alliances to provide industry-leading products and services, and proudly serving more than 18 million unionized workers, retirees, and their families, all working hard for America's working families and for the health of America. You can learn more by following them at Blue Labor on LinkedIn and X, formerly known as Twitter. And don't forget, you can check us out on Facebook or follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter. That would be AWF Union Podcast, AWF Union Podcast. Let's go to our featured guest right now, talking about public education and social reform. There's a book by that name. It's a history of the Illinois Education Association. And joining us on our live line today is Tom Suhrbuhr. And Tom also is an affiliate of the Illinois Labor History Society and a retired organizer for the Illinois Education Association. Tom, welcome to America's Workforce. I love talking history. It's one of my favorite subjects. I'm sure you do as well.
I kind of like.
We're going to learn a lot today, and I didn't know this. This is fascinating. The Illinois Education Association was founded in 1853. 1853. That's a long time. You know, it's funny because we do a lot about unions and the history of unions, especially around Labor Day. And most of it happened in the 1880s, you know, and then Labor Day was finally made a holiday in 1894. Yeah. So talk to me a little bit more about yourself and also the Illinois Education Association. Very groundbreaking work, I might add. So talk to me about that, Tom. Go ahead.
Well, I grew up in a working class family in Cicero, Illinois. I was the first one to go to college. I did the University of Illinois, Chicago, and NIU, several master's degree and a certificate of advanced studies in labor history. My family background was labor. My father was a pipe fitter, union pipe fitter. My great-grandfather was one of the founders of the Carpenters Union in Chicago. So I had and Cicero was basically a blue-collar working-class town. So I grew up in a working-class labor union environment. And after I got, when I was working on my certificate of advanced studies in labor history, I chose the Carpenters Union as my thesis, because my great-grandfather was one of the founders of the union in Chicago. And out of that came a book which I co-authored with Richard Schneiroff on the Carpenters Union. So I always had this union background. I started teaching. I taught 17 years, and my last 12 years were Geneva High School social studies. And then the IEA hired me as a union organizer. And when I retired, I always wanted to write a book about public education and the IEA. The IEA was, for most of its history, it was a professional organization. It was kind of pushed by the IFT, the Illinois Federation of Teachers, and the union movement to eventually the teachers demanded collective bargaining and simply took over the organization in 1970 from administrators who controlled it and turned it into a very militant collective bargaining union. And so that's a little background on me. And I was, by that time, teaching in Geneva and a member of the IEA.
When you say militant, how militant were they?
Well, there was no collective bargaining law, and technically strikes were illegal. So from 1970 to the passage of the collective bargaining law, the IEA was involved in 209 or more strikes. So these strikes sometimes ended with teachers being fired, leaders being arrested, injunctions. But for the most part, most districts, a lot of districts agreed to bargain with the IEA. But all of its history from the earliest days of the IEA from 1853. It had close relationships with the growing labor movement. It worked with labor because the organized labor supported public education. So there was never a question of being allied with them. The only question was the IEA never affiliated with the AFL-CIO to this very day. There were several attempts to merge with the AFL-CIO, but it never did.
And why? Why was that? I mean, isn't it more important to be together for collective power? Would that make sense?
Well, yes, and the IEA worked closely with them. I mean, it was an alliance. But part of the problem, I think, was the IEA had locals all across the state in both large cities, but also in rural areas where the labor movement, for the most part, didn't exist. And it had to deal with members who weren't really keen on being part of the AFL-CIO. So it never really affiliated with AFL-CIO, even though it tried to on several occasions, but it failed. And also, the IEA is much different from the AFT, the Illinois Federation of Teachers local, in its structure too. So it works closely with the Illinois Federation of Teachers, just as the NEA works closely with the AFL-CIO and the American Federation of Teachers. But the affiliation never took place.
Yeah. I guess they just wanted to stay separate. I understand that. Maybe they may have more control that way. I don't know. Let's talk about the attention that you paid in the book on the impact of race, gender, religion, tax policy. Do you go back all the way from the founding, going back to the 1850s here?
Actually, to the 1820s. Illinois became a state in 1818, and there was nothing in the state constitution, the 1818 state constitution, about public education. In 1825, they passed a law that provided for a state tax, to support a public school system. It was for the children of white citizens. That was almost verbatim the law. 8 years later, the tax part of the law was rescinded, and you wanted to pay a tax for public schools, you had to write a letter to the Secretary of State requesting that you be taxed for public school. So guess what?
We know the answer to that one.
Nothing happened. Now, the part of the reason why early statehood was, a lot of people were from southern states and they had no public school system, and a lot of conservatives, and to this very day actually, but back then a lot of conservatives said, I don't want to pay to educate the children of poor white people who have all these kids without any self-control. So the opposition to taxation was strong even at these early days of statehood. What happened was in 1853, there was more and more people from out from the North New England moving into Illinois, and there was a movement all throughout the North, through the free states, to create public schools. And Illinois played a major role in that. A school for all children, not just children of white citizens. In 1853, the Illinois State Teachers Association, which later became the IEA, the State Teachers Association, a lot of the leaders were abolitionists. They were definitely anti-slavery. They looked at the South and said, look, there's no public school system set up in the South. Why? Because a relatively small, powerful group of planters control the politics and the culture of the South. And it's a lot of inequality. Obviously, they're not going to educate the enslaved people, but they didn't even want to. The attitude was, why should we educate these poor white trash? So the education movement in Illinois and throughout the northern states was a direct result of the growing opposition to slavery in the United States. And it wasn't until after the Civil War that public school systems were set up in the South. Well, in 1853, the Illinois State Teachers Association was created. In 1855, it got the first law to create a publicly funded school system throughout Illinois.
Now, did you follow what happened in the South when they finally created public schools? I mean, there probably was an outcry about that.
Well, there was an outcry in the North too. Remember, wealthy conservative people, a lot of them sent their kids to private schools or hired tutors. The planters did that, but there was always opposition to among conservative politics to oppose public funding. Now in Illinois, there was an agreement that we needed public schools. It was viewed as essential for a democratic society. The question then became, who's going to pay for it, or how are we going to pay for it? So the opposition to funding was that they didn't want a statewide funding system. Because if Illinois passed taxes to fund the whole state, well, it would redistribute wealth based on where everybody would get an equal share, and guess who would pay the most.
Right.
So the Illinois developed, and to this very day, it's been modified quite a bit, but developed a funding system that's based on local property taxes. At first, the state tax that was to get the public school going, that was passed in 1855. It was a 2 mil tax. In 1871, the tax was replaced by a $1 million state grant to public schools. That was frozen up until 1907. And if the 2 mil tax was still involved, it wasn't eliminated by the $1 million grant, then state would have been contributing a lot more to the public school system. But because they froze it at 1 million, then state property tax became more and more important. Now the IEA fought tax. The fight, one of the big fights was over taxation, to get the state to do more funding. The IEA at first, Illinois State Teachers Association, IEA, at first they supported the 2 mil tax, getting that back, but finally they switched and went to a state income tax, and there's a history of that.
Mm-hmm.
The race issue, which came up very early, all white children, there was nothing done, despite the IEA, the ISTA's opposition to exclusion. There was nothing done until 1870. Constitution was passed. That had the words public schools for all children.
Right.
Okay. But prior to that, now some schools allowed black kids to go to public schools, but there was a lot of exclusion. Not that there were a large black population in the United States, but black kids were excluded from public schools, especially in central and southern Illinois. Finally, in 1870, they passed with the IEA, the ISTA, the association, I'm going to call it now. Mm-hmm. The association got the state constitutional law to state that all children had a right to public schools. What happened next was Plessy versus Ferguson. And there's a famous case, the Bibb case, where in Alton, Illinois, a black family, Bibb, their kids went to the local school because they had a right to public education. Well, after Plessy versus Ferguson, Alton decided to set up a black school, segregated Jim Crow school on the other side of town. So guess what? Busing was first used to segregate. And this went on in Illinois, in central and southern Illinois, into the 1950s. The last school to end segregation was in the early 60s. And it was only through pressure to defund, not to provide state funding, that these schools finally submitted. But there were, I think, 16 counties where there were segregated Jim Crow schools. One in particular I found fascinating. Evansville, Illinois had 2 high schools in 1947. They had a 3-year school for black kids and a 4-year school for white kids. And in Cairo, there was a segregated elementary school, and 3 towns north of Cairo would put the black kids on a bus and ship them in 20, 30 miles into Cairo to get to the black school there. So the segregation was a big issue right up into the 60s.
Yep.
Yeah. So race,
Um,
taxation, those are 2 big issues.
oh, yeah. And they are today. Let's be honest. I mean, what happened 160 years ago is still prevalent today. I have to ask you, when you did this deep dive into history on behalf of the Illinois Education Association, did it make you ashamed of America when you found all the stuff that happened?
I grew up in Cicero, which is probably the most racist town. And when I grew up, it was, if you were African American, you risked your life walking into that town during the day. Uh, it didn't make me feel guilty because I always was opposed to inequality, race, those issues. Always, I felt they were morally wrong. So no, it didn't make me feel guilty. It made me increasingly aware of what the problem was. For the IEA, the thing that I found out about the IEA when I did the first chapter, all those issues you mentioned at the beginning, race, sex, sexism, racism, taxation, all those issues, unionism, were present in the 19th century. And guess what? The same issues are still present today facing public education.
We'll leave it on that note. Tom, I thank you so much for coming to the table today. Tom Suhrbuhr, author of Public Education and Social Reform, The History of the Illinois Education Association. Just Google it and you can check it out. It's produced by the University of Illinois Press. There you have it. Tom, thank you so much for the history lesson today. I appreciate it. Okay.
Okay. I hope it made sense.